solve of the last activity.
Okay.
So like they're all building up on each other to one endpoint. So if everyone checks well, I don't know if everyone's back yet.
Is there a way to do push to talk on here? I don't want to annoy you guys with my keyboard.
I'm gonna mute everyone and then we'll just get started. Everyone's back in, Latisha.
Okay.
Awesome.
So if you go check the GitHub repo that I sent out at the beginning of this, a solved folder to part 2. So if you didn't get all your files, there's a solution to it. There are of course multiple solutions because we each think differently. And part 3 will actually start from the solved part of part 2. So we're not actually getting different activities. It's all building up on each other. So I'm going to share my screen again, and I want to show you some more of the partial organization because I did some extra stuff in mine. Ooh, that went really weird. That's not what I want either. Okay. So in here, in my assets folder, and I'm going to split my code for this in just a second. This, I think, is the one I want. And let's do. I've completely forgot how to split into panels in Sublime.
That's how you do it.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I usually use Atom, but I know everyone's been training on Sublime, so like I try to use it whenever I'm presenting and for some development so I don't forget what I'm doing entirely, but.
That is awesome of you, Latisha. Thank you.
But occasionally I completely forget how to do things. So what I'm actually wanting to show you here is if you look down, CSS also, or CSS preprocessors, LESS and Sass, allow us to nest styles. So the nav bar of the style sheet had nav and then space A, and then there was a first child style property, and you would have normally written it on 3 different lines. Let me just pull that up so I can show you that too. Okay, so as you can see here, they're written out on all different lines, but with CSS preprocessors, you can actually nest styles like this. The ampersand here means that it's going to add or concatenate the parent element. So it's gonna like string them together. So in the compiled style, it'll actually print out just like this actually. And I can show you that too. So this is the Sass file that printed out, and you can see it printed out the exact same way, but you can nest it. There's some rules for nesting. Don't go more than 4 deep, because when you do, it starts getting unruly, is the best way to describe it. And keep it readable. Readable is always more important than like shortcuts, but nesting does actually, like for me, nesting helps me keep track of what's actually going on a little bit easier than like reading it out like this would.
Oh, Latisha, just out of curiosity, so just for everyone here, is Sass is not a new language? It compiles down to CSS, right?
Sass is actually its own language, and there are 2 versions of it. There's actually Sass, which is very succinct. It gets rid of the curly braces, and it's an indented language. So like it does everything by indenting. They call it version 2. I've never actually used it much. Version 3, they came out with SCSS, which stands for Sassy CSS, and that's what I'm actually writing over here. Unless it's technically its own language too, and they compile down to CSS. Did that answer the question?
Got it. So they're their own languages, but they compile down and create CSS. Got it.
They are their own languages, and like I'm writing CSS code, and if it's valid CSS code, the preprocessor just, copies it over. But when it's looking through, it's doing some additional things. I actually wanted to show another one, but I'm not entirely for sure which file. Okay, so this is only available in SCSS, what I've done here. This is not actually available in LESS, so I don't have the LESS comparison to show you for this one. But if you look at this, and let me move it over here so I can show you the two differences in this. In this one, I have a and then bracket, and this one I have border and then colon. What I'm actually doing here is nesting properties, which seems a little bit weird, but it does ultimately let you write more dry code because you're not repeating the same things nearly as much. What I'm doing here is I'm writing border left and border right styles, and they are nested as well. And I will pull back up the compiled to show you how that went out. So there's the whole thumbnail, and you can see here it did border color, border left, border right. It works for margins too. So like you could write margin, here. I can write margin and then nest it as a property the same way. So, and then do top 10 pixels and bottom. So when I said more dry, I'm now not having to write, margin dash top on every time I want to do that. That feature is not actually available in LESS, only Sass, but I wanted to show that to you. The next thing that we're moving into for part 3, does anyone have any questions about nesting before I move on?
So do you write in Sass or do you write in CSS and convert it to Sass?
So I guess the best way to think about either of them for Sass or LESS is you're writing in CSS, except for when you can leverage Sass. Because as you're looking at the files that I have displayed here, they look very much like CSS. As we move on, you're going to start seeing that they're going to look less and less just like CSS would. So like this part here is just CSS, right? But this part here, it's CSS and it's Sass, because CSS you can't nest, and CSS this here for selectors wouldn't work.
Yeah, could you explain that ampersand colon real quick? I think you probably already did, but I just.
Yeah. So what this is doing is this is saying I want to have a style that I am putting the first child pseudo selector on the A tag. So the ampersand says call the property above me, call the parent property, parent selector. So ampersand will refer to it like that. When I don't put the ampersand like here, it writes out like that. Could you see my screen?
Yeah, I see it. Yeah. Thanks.
All right, so now that's all cool, and we have organization, but that's only kind of useful. And nesting is useful, and I mean, it makes it, for me, it makes it easier to read. It might not make it easier to read for everyone. I won't speak for everyone on that. But where we start getting really cool is we can have variables. Variables are what makes this so that we don't have to, if we have one of those big branding projects that I was talking about at the beginning of this, we don't have to go through and change every instance of a color. We may only have to change a few where they've decided that this line or this header should no longer be this color, but it should be this branding color. It also allows us to set up things like fonts, and it allows us to set up things like Sass on this side, LESS on this side. It allows us to set up any variables that we would want. So we can set up margins, base, font sizes, all kinds of stuff like that. So anything that like you would put in a variable in code or that you feel should be in a variable, you can write it out as a variable. In Sass, variables are defined with a $sign, so a bit like PHP if you're familiar with that. In Less, they are defined with the @ sign. So they look like this. As a side note on this, Atom will color code less code for you. There is a way to color code it in Sublime. You have to go get an extra package, and I don't actually have any like really extra Sublime packages installed on this machine. So no color coding in Sublime for that. So you can see I've set up some branding colors here for the portfolio. I put, the main branding color in there. I put a brand secondary. Info, success, warning, and danger. How I actually got these is these two. So the way this is defined, brand dash primary, comes from Bootstrap, and Bootstrap actually has brand dash info. I think it's brand dash info, success, warning, and danger. They don't actually have a secondary, but a lot of websites, when you're doing the CSS, they actually have two main branding colors that don't necessarily fit in with the info success. So I usually just add a brand secondary in there for projects I'm working on. And then it's always nice to have a grayscale to refer to. And this comes from another foundation, the naming scheme on here, but it goes from white to black. You'll notice that the white isn't actually white because that's FFF. As a general like design rule, a lot of people don't use straight white and straight black as colors because it's easier for our eyes to process slightly shades that are off, and it makes it so that the website is just easier for people to comprehend sometimes or see. There's big studies done on that for extra information. So for activity 3, what we want you to do is you can take the solved folder from 2, go add your own variables.less, and variables.sass, pick whichever one you prefer, and then you'll need to add it into the style-1 to do all the importing in, just like that. And then you will come into one of the files and you can see this is the Sass file. You can see I've come in here and I've replaced, I've started and I've put all the margins. This is like a base font size, the rim base. I put all the margins based off that size. So now my site is all based off one size to multiply everything out. And I've gone through and I've changed all the colors to one of my colors that I've put in the variables. And so now like I could come in and say, this isn't white enough. I can come in and change this like this, recompile my files down, and every place that I have white defined changes to that color. So it's a pretty nice feature. And let me show you what variables look like in a Less page as well. So when you do them in Less, you have to include them with the @ sign and not the $sign. Anyone have any questions or concerns about variables?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
How do you when you make that change, like the change that you just suggested to change your white, and then you compile it again? What are you doing when you're compiling? Like, what is the operation to do that? Is it just like a run compile, or how are you actually recompiling?
Show you how to do that since I have not.
Because I think that's really where the largest benefit comes in, right? When you set up your variables and then you're actually
then you're actually compiling it and including either the same style sheet or different ones. So we'll go here.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, give me just. Right, so here is my terminal window. Well, here's my style sheet. So we'll do the Sass one because that's what I actually have set up as the primary. I'm going to change this to F7, but I want to show you what this looks like first. So open in browser. Okay, so you can see it's a little bit off white. It's mostly white. And then if I come in here, I guess we could change it to something other than white altogether. Sure. So let's change this to purple. So it's extremely obvious when I'm making changes, I usually do something that is very, like, if it's a habit, if I'm trying to see what I'm doing in the web and I want to make it really obvious, I will use colors like purple and pink or red, blue, orange, very bright, very primary colors. So I have this set up as the default Sass. Default task will watch for changes in the Sass file. So all I have to do is actually type grunt and it goes and it recompiles with the Sass dev task. And then it's running the watch task. So that means it's watching for additional changes in my files. So now if I refresh, you can see that all the whites everywhere changed to purple. So it's not actually, wouldn't want to go public with that, but it does actually help to see where all the whites are. So we're going to change this back, and I actually like, I think I had FA. I think that's almost right. And if I flip back over to my terminal, you can see that it ran again down here at the bottom. That went a little weird. And if I refresh, it was very quick. It's back to white. There are actually several tasks you can run in this. So Control-C to stop the watch task, that's the default one. Let me clear that so it's back up at the top of the screen. So Sass dev will compile the Sass sheet. Sass dist will compile for production, which means it's going to minify it and actually create a style-sass.min.css. Less dev will compile the less sheet, and less dist will do the same for that. Well, I will get that fixed in Slack. I'll add a new grunt file afterwards. And then I didn't actually compile for production. And then w less will watch for changes in the less file, just like we did the Sass. You'll see on my command line, it says source map created. That's actually useful because when you start compiling your style sheet like this, now everything's in a partial file. So if you're using the Google inspector, without the source map, it couldn't tell you that the style definition is found in which partial. So the source map actually gives the browser that piece of information when you're developing. Ready to create your own variables? Yeah.
Let's do it. So what variable should we create?
So you should create color variables. I create one for fonts. I have a sans serif and a serif font. And I create one for a base font size, so I can base all my sizes, my margins, my paddings, everything off my font size. And then I use math to figure it out in the CSS. That is another feature of CSS preprocessors, is you can use math, which I know like we're almost there with CSS3, but not quite yet. So you can multiply, divide, subtract, add various things with math.
Awesome.
And you can use like predefined variables in those like equations or those statements like you're making. So like if you have a number that's or like a variable that's been assigned a number, you can use that.
Yeah, here. Let me. I have too many windows open now. Okay. So here, when I was flipping out all the margins, here I have rim base, which is my base font size, and I have it multiplying by 1.5 to get that margin. I do the same for font sizes down here and here, and in a couple of places I actually subtract. And, so like here I'm multiplying by 0.75 to get a smaller one. Did that answer the question?
Yes, it did.
So I'd start with your colors first, your main brand color that's in the style sheet, and put it into a variable and then replace it. Pick less or Sass, dependingly. At the end, we'll be working in Bootstrap, and that's in less. So that helps make your decision.
So we replace the variables within the other lesser or Sass
Within the other
files.
lesser Sass files. So
Okay.
like if you're doing a color, everywhere where you had the hashtag for A5 defined, create a brand primary for it, and then go find it and replace all those instances within there, and then go change that color to another color. If you do npm install in the directory, you should be able to run the grunt task yourself and compile the style sheets. They will compile out to style-sass. Normally you would just compile that to style.css, but I've got multiple ones going on for the demonstration, so I've been flipping style sheets in the HTML.
Great, thank you.
And if you look in the pre-setup work, the various grunt tasks should be in the instructions that came with that.
So why do we need Ruby?
The config.rb,
The Ruby, why do we need Ruby?
Ruby is for actually compiling Sass. So we're leveraging Grunt to do the work for us, but Grunt won't compile Sass without Ruby.
Okay. And Compass, what does Compass do?
Compass is a extension of Sass that a lot of Sass projects are based upon. I thought we were going to have time to actually look at what all Compass can do for us, but we're not actually going to have time for that today. Maybe at another point, but I recommend that you go investigate Compass yourself, because it gives you a lot of extra functions that are not actually available in Sass. So like with Compass, Compass has things for building box shadows, for instance, so you don't have to write your own box shadow. They have extra color functions to actually manipulate colors when you're using colors. And things for backgrounds and opacities and text shadows and CSS transitions. So like a lot of helper classes that don't just come with Sass to help make you lazy developers.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Latisha, I have a question.
Yep.
So what tips do you have if you were like, let's say you were on a project with a company and they wanted to migrate towards Sass? What tips would you have in doing that architectural change?
Yeah, so I actually did this about 2-3 years ago for my company. We were using, I think it was 2014, we were converting to HTML5 at the same time. And we were using plain CSS files. We had been using these CSS files since IE6, and IE is our main browser, so they had a lot of IE hacks in them. On top of that, they were getting completely unmanageable. I could not actually change anything in them without breaking something somewhere else due to inheritance problems. So I was like, no, this is absolutely ridiculous. So I wanted to do it with Sass because I knew at that point in time that Sass compiled to a more optimized style sheet. And that was an important consideration because we serve our files around the world and we need them to be fast. So the smaller CSS file I can have, the better off I am. So at the time, I went with Zerb's Foundation, which due to time constraints, I've decided not to share that to you, but I highly recommend it, or Bootstrap 4 now. Bootstrap 4 is still in beta, so you may have a harder time like convincing your company to go with Bootstrap 4, but Zerb's Foundation is solid. The classes are slightly different for those familiar with Bootstrap, but it more or less provides like the same type of framework. So I actually took all our stuff and I started with Zerb's Foundation and I customized it. So I went into their variables file and applied all my own variables to it. Like, you know, I went and changed all their colors to match our branding scheme. I went and changed all their margins to what I needed the margins to be. And then I set up partial folders to add additional partials and slowly moved every style that we needed to keep from the main CSS file into one of the partial files. Once I moved it, I replaced it with all the variables that I had created. So like, which was really fortunate because not like 6 months later, we actually had a rebranding project where I had to go from one shade of red to another shade of red, which seems absurd because it's all red, right? But it's not, and there's a difference. And so like, when it came time to do that, I was like, oh, I got this completely. All I have to do, and I went and changed one variable, recompiled, and was, you know, more or less done for a rebranding project. But I recommend starting with the CSS framework and then slowly moving what you have to keep out there. You're going to need to convince them of slight redesigns in the process, especially if you're working with an older website like we were. Not everything is going to be
great advice.
Same exact pixel place it was before you did this. But it's all a good thing because it's going to be more organized. But yeah, if you're running into a lot of inheritance problems, I highly recommend you start down this line. It's made it so like now I know exactly where everything is. I have another grunt task that actually runs through and creates live documentation for me every time I make a change to my files to keep, you know, the rest of the development team up to date on what's in my Sass files. And, you know, they're all organized. We all know which place something is supposed to go. And you can go in there and you can make a change to it and not actually break anything else on the website now, which is amazing.
Yeah, I love how you change one variable and everything updates. That's beautiful.
Yeah, did you get to play with that and change like all whites to purple or red or blue or something?
We have a question from Cam. Latisha, why the underscores in front of each of the file names?
So the underscores help for you to recognize that this is a partial file, which means it contains a piece of the code. The other thing underscores do is Grunt actually ignores them and won't look in them for add import statements, which is good because ultimately you don't want a content.css, a footer.css, a forms.css. No, I want one file at the end of this.
That's cool. And you would just import those partials just like with that sign?
Mm-hmm. It depends. Yeah. And both of them, I think it's at. If you look in the style-less and the style-sass that I've provided, it's add import in style-less and add import in style-less. Had to double check because there's some keyword differences when you get into doing certain things between the two languages.
Awesome. Do you recommend any any website that gives like any snippets or quick?
So I've actually used the Sass website a lot, and I'll slack it out for the documentation. Now it is documentation, so sometimes it is a bit hard to consume. And this is all in the browser. Okay, so there's the main Sass website. Here's the less website. I've talked about Compass a lot. And then I have found Smashing Magazine and a list apart to actually be fairly useful. I don't have those up in my browser right now, so. Oftentimes I will just Google, how do you do something in whatever language. CodePen is also really good for browsing for snippets, because CodePen, when you load it up, it's preloaded to write SCSS. Or maybe I set that in my settings, but mine is set like preloaded to do that. So it says SCSS up at the top.
Latisha, is it supposed to create, is a grunt file supposed to create the style-sass CSS and then the style-sass CSS.map underneath the style-sass.scss within the SCSS folder instead of the CSS folder? Because for some reason mine created it inside of the SCSS folder and then nested underneath within the style-sass.css folder. Okay.
Mine is in, all mine are in the CSS folder.
Okay. Because I'm getting an error, so that's probably why, right?
That's all defined in the grunt file. If you're doing less, I'll go ahead and tell you the less dist isn't working right now, and I'll get a new file in the Git repo for that one, but less dev will.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Okay, so I hope everyone had time to look at some variables. If you want to see what source code looks like for that, I've added it to the GitHub repo as well. And now we're going to look at extending CSS properties. So variables are useful, extremely useful, because now like we can change one variable and everything changes, and that's massively exciting. It was for me when I first discovered it. So extending is a whole new thing though. When you're extending, you're actually extending a CSS property that already exists. So, if you look here, I have a new command here, and I have it in less as well, and it looks different. So I definitely want to pull both of these up. Okay, so I have an @extend.left on the logo here. And in the other one, in the less file, it's &:extend (parentheses) .left. What both of these are doing is extending a style that I have written in another file. So up here, I have written a .left class, and it floats things left, because how often do you float things left? And I mean, you're still having to write this. So writing this isn't actually particularly drier. On the extending, I mean, it would help if you've got a whole long definition that has multiple things in it, and you need to extend it in multiple places. Where this really comes in handy though is when it writes out the CSS, when it's processed, everything that I've extended actually goes on the same selector. So that helps the browser a little bit for optimization on that. And down here, I have what we call a placeholder. These only exist in Sass again. Placeholders do not exist in less. And what this does is this will not actually show up anywhere in my CSS file. I can run a search in my compiled CSS file for growth icon, and I'm not going to find it. This is a placeholder style. It's meant to do some extra things and allow you to write a style definition that you don't want to actually have its own class. You only actually want to extend it in the files. And so here in this one, for the social, I'm at extending growth icon, and it's the only place I'm doing it. So like there's nothing, really big about that yet. But here, if I do that, it actually put the placeholder style in its own little thing. So if I extend more, it'll actually comma and then, next icon, and group all these styles that are the same together. And what I've done with that one is I made these icons right here grow because it's a nifty little effect. You can, as I mentioned, extend in and less as well. Basic styles like left or right, or way more complicated styles. And I use extending a lot. If I've written a style definition and I need to reuse almost that exact same style definition or really close to it in another property, I will completely extend the previous property. The caveat to this is where it comes back to that main file where all the imports are. If my style that I want to change is here, I have to have what I'm extending in a file above it. So if it's down here in this one, I can't extend it in any of these.
What is the significance of percentile operator with when you're defining extend, the definition?
Can you repeat that question, please?
So I see there are some percentile operators wherever you define the extend or definition that you're going to extend in some other class.
Mm-hmm. So here I put them all in utils because left and right are like utility classes really, they're float left and right and they do some things, but they don't really belong in another style shape by themselves. And then this one is the placeholder one. Less does not have placeholders. We only have placeholders in Sass. And it doesn't go in the style sheet itself because like by itself, I'd have to apply an additional class for it.
Mm-hmm.
But if I, know I'm going to use it in multiple examples or multiple places, I might write a placeholder for it because like just by itself, I need other things to go with it, but I don't want to have to rewrite this part over and over and over again.
So every placeholder that I'm going to define here has to be preceded by a percentile symbol.
Yeah, placeholders have to be preceded by that.
Okay.
Okay, so I'd like y'all to actually write your own float left and right and try to extend it and try to compile it out, if you don't mind. And if you have any questions, I will be more than glad to answer them while y'all work on this.
Hey, Latisha, how long should we spend working on this?
I'm gonna give you like 5-10 minutes because really I'm just wanting you to write a class and extend it in a place and see how it's working.
Cool. I'll break them out into rooms and then they can work on it together.
Cool.
All right, awesome.
You can use, if you don't have the variables, you can go get the solution files from the 3 that I put in there and use those for this part. And the way you do Sass and Less in the different languages, the way you extend it is massively different. It's add extend in Sass. In Less, you have to use ampersand, colon, extend, parentheses, and the class name inside of that. So I can only like see Camden on my screen.
Oh yeah, Latisha, I'm just I opened up the rooms.
Yeah, he's looking stressed. I'm gonna pick on him a little bit because he's like right there and he's looking stressed.
No, I'm helping two of our students do homework at the same time, and I'm like flipping between four
Yep.
different screens, and yeah, that's why I'm stressed, is because I can't understand someone else's code right now.
So I'll bring him back in about like 6 minutes or so.
Thank you very much. When I'm sharing my screen, does it show both my screen and the video?
Yeah, it automatically does both.
Okay, so everyone saw my cat.
That's awesome.
She-
CSS cat.
Yeah, she decided right at that particular moment she wanted up in my lap, which is weird because she's not really a lap cat. And I was like, thank you, cat.
She wanted attention.
Kind of, although, so add extend is going to, yeah, I mean, you're inheriting whatever you're extending. It prints out all those definitions, like in the compiled file, it prints all those definitions in the CSS. It's kind of like that. Are you trying it out yourself, Pawan?
Yeah, I was just attending to students. When do you want to bring them back in?
They probably have had time to extend at least one property now.
Okay, great. I will close the rooms right now.
Thank you.
No problem. They'll be fully closed in 50 seconds.
Latisha, I keep getting undefined variables when I'm trying to add any of the variables into the actual files.
Did you go
I
into
would be getting it.
style-sass or style-less.lesser dot which version did you go with?
Sass. I was
Okay,
doing the
so did you
Sass.
go into the style-sass.scss and
Yep.
did you
And
add import underscore variables?
Mm-hmm.
Where
Yep.
did you put it?
I put it at the very bottom. Should it be somewhere else?
So when you're adding
Because
things
it's
to the add
cascading.
import, you have to make it available to whatever like before you're going to actually
Okay.
call.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, no fancy hoisting in CSS.
Unfortunately not. Would you mind just sharing your screen real quick so we can see what the extends look like? The screen that you had before?
Yep. I have to pull them back up for you. So I had prepared for the next thing. Let's see. You said Sass, so there I am at extending left in Sass, and here I'm at extending left in less.
And then the dot left is coming from your utils file?
Yes, the dot left is coming from my utils file. I usually put my utils file somewhere towards the top of my variables comes first because I'm going to use my variables in everything. And then after my variables, I usually put my utils file. So I'll just
Awesome, thank you.
So reset first because that always comes first, and then variables, and then I do utils because I'm going to probably use those everywhere else and they shouldn't really be using anything but variables. And then I'll do scaffolding because that's like, sets my body up and sets, any other tags, like if I'm doing something on HTML or like global styles. After that one, I usually do my typography because everything needs typography. And so I might like be including it elsewhere. After that, it's usually just based on if I might use this somewhere else, I'll put it above. In this example, I've done forms because it was a more general global thing, and then header footer and content were actually very specific to the content on this site. So like the base structure for util, scaffolding, typography, and forms, I could probably like port over to any site and have some base styles in there for those elements, but header, footer, and content really got into classes and IDs.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, is everyone back from breakout rooms?
Yep, everyone's back.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and talk about the next bit. So the next really useful feature of both the languages is mixins. I went and actually got a definition of a mixin to see how like someone else would define it, and it's defined as a class that contains methods for use by other classes without having to be the parent class of those other classes, something to be included, not inherited. So like that definition outside of that last bit didn't really help me, and like for me it helps to actually see what they look like. And I've defined a couple. I think of a mixin as almost a function, except for both languages. Well, Sass at the very least actually has functions, but a mixin is a group of properties that you don't want to extend. You don't necessarily want anything else to inherit them, but you want to be able to reuse them, and you possibly want to be able to reuse them in different ways. So what I've done here is I've actually set up a mixin, and I'm going to make this a bit wider because I can't even see what I've done. I've actually set up a mixin here to do a button, and it takes two arguments, the bits in parentheses, the bits I'm going to pass into it, color and font color, which I know is a little bit weird for CSS, but it should have been like, you know, BG color and color, but for the moment it was color and font color for this example. And then I've gone in here and I've set, well, I've included a whole nother mixin in here to dry some things out. But then I've also, you know, went in here and wrote background color, and it's actually taking whatever I'm passing into it, and border color. And this is a function of Sass that will actually darken the color that I am using. You also have lighten and mix. And if you're using Compass, you can actually get a few more on top of that. And so here I'm using the same color and just darkening it to get a different border color. And then I'm using the font color to set the color of the font, because if you have a dark button, you're going to want a white font. And if you don't meet the font color variable, you might miss that. And then I set up some hover styles for it too. The reason I separated the static from the variable ones is because this I could include anywhere. I could include it in another function that even takes another mixin that even takes different variables, and you know it's going to work exactly the same every time, but this one actually requires arguments to work, and if I don't pass them in, it will error out, and you'll see that running grunt if you don't pass them in. Less actually looks a bit different. There's no keyword to tell you it's a mixin. It just looks like a class, and then you have parentheses after it, or button static actually just looks like a class. So it's just how you include it. Now I've actually included this in forms here. So the input on the form, the submit button, I've included this mixin here, and I'm passing in two colors, brand primary and brand white. And the rest of this is just setting other things. I think that was a mistake based on what I'm trying to do. And then unless I've done the same as well, and it is you call the class like this, no add include, no anything, and pass in the variables that you want it to have. So I'm actually going to, I'm already running the watch task for this in the terminal over here, and it says done completed, which is what we want it to say. And then I have the web page up over here. So I have this button, and you can see the border and everything like that. If I come back over to my code, and this is in the Sass. So if I change this to brand secondary, it will change the entire button. So, oops. So if you misspell anything or get any errors, as some of you may have already seen, it will actually tell you, hey, you have an undefined something on what line it's from and what file it's in. And so you actually get CSS errors. That also works if you write CSS that won't compile. So if you forget a curly brace or you forget like this, it will spit out an error, which is kind of nice because regular CSS code you get in the browser and then nothing works and your entire web page looks like junk. So that should have compiled now, and I should be able to refresh it. I see that it compiled. Well, this is why we have a source map in the right folder, right page. This is where my mixin was, and it's telling me that it's coming from here. My background color is still there. Okay. Am I compiling the right folder? I have to be compiling the right folder, otherwise it wouldn't compile. Okay, that's an interesting effect. Oh, we can check one more thing and see, but it says, so mixins do work usually when you include the right style sheet at least. And the button is red. I could include that mixin in any other button and be able to pass it in a color and get the same look for it. And if you look, the border actually changes from a dark green to a dark red. Can anyone else think of when a mixin might be useful besides buttons? So another place that you're likely to actually see mixins is in grids. I see them a lot with box shadows, or a couple of other places that you see mixins. Do y'all want to try to write your own mixin?
I think that's a great idea.
Excellent. So I have uploaded the folders for 4 already to the GitHub repo, so y'all can use the solved of that one with the extended properties to start your mixins. And you'll want to compile it to actually see it. I will actually leave the button mixin up on the screen so you can see it as well. Like I said, they look a bit different depending on if you're looking at Sass or less. So 5 to 10 minutes to try to get a mixin to work.
Let's do it. I just started a breakout room and they are joining in.
And they can still see my screen and hear me in breakout rooms too?
I believe they can still see your screen in a breakout room.
Cool.
But they can't hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll end the breakout room in about 7 minutes.
Cool. Thank you.
No problem.
Get pull and see what we see.
So, Pavan, I was just saying that, Latisha was saying that she's been updating the repo with partially solved solutions, but I have not seen any of those up on the repo. So I got lost around the import section, but just kind of been paying attention.
Did you fork it, Tim, or did you clone it?
I forked it.
Forked it. If you pull, did you add upstream? Yes, you would have to add a remote in. Let me put what you would have to add in. 1 second. Tim, did you get what I sent out?
Let's see.
Did you send it to Gitter?
Yeah, I sent it to Gitter. Yeah, you're basically running git remote add upstream, and then the SSH for releases, and then you do git pull upstream master.
Got it. I'll run it.
And Anna, I like that resource you sent. The main thing I liked was it showed the CSS and the less and the Sass.
Mm-hmm.
And then it showed stylus. I didn't even know what stylus was.
I don't know. It was nice to compare all of them at the same time. So
exactly. That's like key because I know how to do things in CSS kind of for the most part, but not all those things at the same time.
yeah, no. So it's pretty interesting. Okay, I'm trying to, I forked as well, and then I ended up just cloning the repo just so I can pull, but I didn't know you can do this upstream. Git pull upstream master.
Yeah, this is how you work with open source stuff. Fork, and then you add upstream to theirs.
Cool. Got it. Cool. I'm just going to delete that repository I created. It's rm-rf.
I'm going to close the room in about 2 minutes.
Sounds good.
Okay. So where did she start creating these mixins at?
It looks, let me see, I'm still opening it up. I'm going to choose Sass. So it looks like she has that style/sass.scss sheet that's in the SCSS Sass folder. And she's importing all the files there. And then let's see, where's the mixins?
So I think we're supposed to write a mixin, but my question was kind of even more basic. Where do I start writing mixins at?
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. Trying to figure it out. Let's see, let's go to mixins. Find. Documentation. Mixins. Okay, it looks like mixins start with an @ sign as well, so it looks kind of like a variable, but it's @mixin. So let's see if we can find @mixin in one of her files.
Oh, guys, I'm going to send you back into the room since it ends at 6.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Latisha, it should end in a minute. They should all be back in.
Okay, sounds good. And then we'll get to the really exciting bit, customizing Bootstrap, which I think is what everyone's actually here for.
Latisha, there's a question by Aldo. He asked, so for all our projects, do we need a grunt file, or is calling grunt Sass in the terminal enough?
So the grunt file is specifically for compiling Sass and less. So if you're going to be using Sass or less, I would recommend using some sort of task runner. I've supplied you with a grunt file and you're set up to use that. So that's an easy way to go. There are other task runners out there if you'd rather look into one of those. If you're not using less or Sass, you don't have to include the grunt file. Does that answer the question?
Yep. He says, thank you.
Excellent. I can't actually see it because I'm making sure they can all see my screen. So. I recommend on that note too that you leave the grunt file in the repo even when you push it to get. Don't add it to the get ignore, but anyone who's using your repository will need to be told to install the Grunt CLI globally to make use of it. And from what I can see, that's fairly standard for using Grunt as a task runner.
Yeah, I think everyone's back in. Latisha?
Excellent. All right, so what we want to actually look at next is customizing Bootstrap, which is going to be very, very exciting. And for this, I actually have a window I can use. I'm going to use this one. We're not going to need this process anymore anyways. So what I've done here for people who are on Windows or not familiar with this feature of terminal, I've actually added a new tab to my terminal so I can have two terminal windows open in the same window. So I'm going to actually go into the unsolved folder, and I have supplied a package.json. So when I do an npm install on this one of the things that should actually happen is it's going to install Bootstrap, because Bootstrap is right there. It showed Bootstrap. Bootstrap, you can actually install it via an npm package. Now, when you're customizing Bootstrap, you don't want to just go in and edit the files in the node module. Like, one, you always add that to your get ignore. So as you can see here, there's node modules right here. And so one, it's not going to get uploaded to GitHub, which means none of my changes, if I edited these files, would actually be tracked. That is a horrible workflow practice, because something happens to my computer, you know, that doesn't work. I can't share with anyone else who's working on front end. So like that's not good either, because now we're slacking around files. And then if I update the Bootstrap package, or let Node update the Bootstrap package, then all of a sudden, like, all my changes could be gone. So what we actually want to learn is how to customize Bootstrap non-destructively. Now, Bootstrap is in the node modules folder, and I do recommend you explore it a little bit. Bootstrap actually comes with their own grunt file that has lots of things in it. The important parts about grunt files, like, are usually at the bottom, because most of the time they will set up various registers tasks, which will do various things. These actually just provide you with docs looking at them. But here you can actually manually compile the JavaScript, the CSS, and everything for Bootstrap. We're not actually going to be using that for how we do this, because we want to do it non-destructively. So we're going to compile our own Bootstrap completely. And when I say non-destructively, I mean, like, you know, we can add it to get our changes, our specific changes to get. We are not changing the core Bootstrap files, so our files won't be overwritten. Bootstrap is only in less. Well, they have a Sass port to it, but it was originally written in less, and I've never had really good luck with their Sass port. I'm waiting for Bootstrap 4 to move to their Sass. So in the node modules Bootstrap less folder, there is a bootstrap.less, and I'm going to open it up because I want to show you all a couple of things in it. And then there is also a variables.less. And now one of the first things you're going to see is none of these files start with an underscore. So you're like, are these partials? Are these not? Everything but the bootstrap.less is technically a partial. This is your main file. Here's all your add imports. This is what less is looking for. Less doesn't have the standard as much as Sass to do the underscores. I've done all my partials that way because A, Grunt ignores them, and so like that's just an added benefit, and B, it standardizes both systems, but as you can see, Bootstrap doesn't. In here, in the bootstrap.less, it shows you everything that's being imported for Bootstrap. What we want to actually do is we're going to take both these files, and if you look here, I have a variables.less and a bootstrap.less. I actually copied both of these files from the node modules folder down here into my own less folder up here. And then I have, so I'm going to move their bootstrap.less over here and keep my bootstrap.less over there. And I think I'm word dropping, and we're going to move that to give us a little bit more room. Color coding would be nice. And I think if I change this at least to CSS, we may get some things. Yep. So I'll just do that on both files. And there's a trick for getting some color coding available to you. It won't work perfectly because there are some things in less that don't work for CSS. So as you can see, these are similar, except for I've changed the at import to node modules bootstrap less so that it points at the bootstrap folder. So I'm actually importing the core bootstrap files into my bootstrap folder, my bootstrap.less file. Then, so I've included their variables.less, and then I've included my own variables.less. And right now the contents of these are mostly the same because I didn't take just a ton of time to clean it up. But this variables.less, ideally you would only want the variables in which you're overriding in here. I've just copied the entire file for the purposes of this, but like after you go through it, if you didn't change it, delete it out because you don't need to override it, and it's just extra code that has to be processed. The reason that you want to include both, because you're like, if I've moved the entire file, why do I need to include both? Well, if the Bootstrap core system updates and they add more variables, all of a sudden you're not going to have those variables in the variables file you're including. And so, you know, you're going to need them to come from there in case you missed like variables or something to keep everything else from crashing out. So that's the big reason for doing this. Including both and not just, you know, completely overwriting it with your own. The one that's in less, the assets less folder is the one we'll actually customize. Then I've included all the files because who knows, I might actually be using all of these, but say you only actually want part of Bootstrap. Like for instance, if I was going to get rid of anything, I very rarely actually use the glyph icons. I almost always include font awesome. So why am I importing glyph icons when I'm not going to use them? I can actually just remove them out and they're no longer part of my Bootstrap, you know, compiled system. They're still in the node modules folder. If I ever want them, I just put that back in, and there I have glyph icons again, but not going to use them. And I could do that with any of these all the way through. If I'm not going to use it, I just get rid of it. Like say I've got my own carousel. Don't need that, we just get rid of it. And that will make your CSS file smaller, which is better optimized for mobile and for people who are not on really fast connections. And then down here at the bottom, you see I've got two extra files in this folder, an underscore navbar.less and an underscore custom.less. I could have divided this up into more partials, but I was seeing how many styles I actually needed first. Because once you start using Bootstrap, you should leverage Bootstrap where possible and then override or change where you absolutely need to. Is generally the principle like I go on. If I'm going to include a CSS framework, I'm going to leverage it as much as I possibly can because I like being a lazy developer. And so these just have some custom things in there. Here I had to change some things for the navbar to make it look the way that I wanted it to. And so I only overrode the absolute properties that I needed to. Here's the ampersand again. This is just combining this onto navbar brand. So it'll look like navbar brand hashtag logo. So it's going to look for both of those styles in the selector is how that actually looks. And you can see here, I've got some variables that you might not have ever actually seen before. All of those are in this huge file called variables.less. And so in here are all the variables that Bootstrap actually defines. So they do a grayscale. The @white is actually one I added on because they were actually using FFF or straight white for their white. And I don't really like to do that. All the way through here, here's like @brand primary, success, info, warning, dangers, so the 5 colors, and I've customized and changed those. And then I've commented some stuff out, or it came commented out because I wasn't going to be using it or changing it. But and the CSS highlighting has gone a little bit weird as well. Right about here, it went weird because it's seeing both type of comments, and I don't have good code highlighting. And so here I changed the fonts to the fonts that we were seeing in the other files, and I changed the base size. And then if I go back down, Bootstrap actually provides variables for all kinds of things. So I can do a find and replace and see what type of variables that they include for nav bars. So here I can change the nav bar height. The actual standard nav bar height for Bootstrap is 50. And I can go through and I can change that, and then I can actually even change the colors. Some of these, they had hard-coded hashtags in it, and I changed it over to variables. And then I even added another variable down here to the nav bar because I needed this color. This variable doesn't actually exist in the core Bootstrap. So I start, anytime I'm customizing Bootstrap, I always start with the variables file. The custom one, not the one in node modules, because if I did that, it would just be overridden and then I'd lose all my hard work for that. And then I went through and saw what other styles I needed to make this work, and I added them in to custom files. So there's some content highlighting. You can see that all of these variables Bootstrap provided for me in some form or fashion for me to take advantage of. And because in this file, I put my own down at the bottom, I have all the custom Bootstrap stuff available in my own files that I'm actually writing. So now I will show you what this looks like, because it does. This is the Bootstrap portfolio from week 2. And here it is customized with Bootstrap. There are a couple of differences, but if I look in here, once it did this, I no longer needed to include a style.css too. All I'm including is bootstrap.css because everything's now in the Bootstrap file. This was the Bootstrap blue that you always see there, and now you can see that it is the green of the brand color we were using. And now, to actually give you a demonstration that I am compiling Bootstrap. I'm going to move into the solved folder, and I've set up this grunt file a little bit differently. So it's actually just doing the watch.less, and I've cleaned it up, this particular one, so that it only includes the less stuff because Bootstrap is just less. And then I want to change, we go all the way back up to the top. I want to change my brand primary to this other hashtag that I have over here commented out. So I'm going to take this one so I can have it later. We're just going to move it over here, put a couple of slashes in front of it, remove that, put a new semicolon so I don't get an error, and save the file. You have to save the file. I always forget to save my files. And if we look in terminal, it says done completing at 17:10 right there. And if I go over here and I reload my page, everything is now blue instead of green. And completely done with Bootstrap. So I can add both my unsolved and my solved files for the Bootstrap, and then let y'all have a little bit of time to customize your own Bootstrap customization. And then I'd love to see what y'all actually do with that. Does anyone have any questions or need me to go back over anything for customizing Bootstrap?
Hey, Latisha, I have a question. So in deployment, is there anything special that you have to do when you deploy to make sure everything compiles properly? Or do you just include the grunt file and that takes care of it?
Yeah, so the grunt file is really just for your development process. What I would actually do, and like I said, I have to get everyone a new grunt file for the last dis, which I think stands for distributed. You could do prod too. So as you can see, it says that that's not actually written because no source files were found. I have to go make a correction to that. But I would actually run the one that I set up for production right here. And you could call this prod instead of dist if you wanted. It's just a pattern that I found. And here's why it's not actually compiling for that. And what this does is this one actually minifies or compresses it. So you get a minified version of it. And that's what you actually want to use in production. So like for production, now that I've fixed that, and y'all will actually get one that works for this, I can do this again. And it says one style sheet created. And so if I go over here and I look in my assets folder, I should have a bootstrap.men.css now. And you can see it's all on a couple of lines instead of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lines. So that's good for production. And then I'd have to go, in here and change this to .men. And then I'd actually send this up to production and not the uncompiled one.
Awesome.
The only reason to add the grunt file to your Git repository really is so that all your developers can change your own, you can use the same task runner. Everyone might actually have their own workflow and own grunt file and not want the provided one.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're just deploying CSS into production, and the grunt file is just for us as developers to compile the Sass files. And let's awesome.
And grunt can do a lot more for you besides just compile like Sass and Less. That's all we're using it for here. But at work, I actually use my grunt file to not only compile my style sheets, but to run all my tests for test-driven development for JavaScript and to compile JavaScript. And I have it actually linting my JavaScript too. So like if I make a mistake, it's like, hey, what are you doing? So grunt's actually really, really powerful, but different topic altogether.
Very cool. Any questions, guys? All right. So we are past our 6 p.m. Time, but we're here on the Gitter. So message any questions you have for the community, and Latisha's on there, I'm on there, and we will help. Awesome. I'm hoping that a lot of you take this and use Sass or Less in your projects.
I hope so too, because I think they're really awesome. And for people who are having a hard time like overwriting Bootstrap or really customizing it to your heart's desire, if you want to completely change how one of the partial files works, copy it over to your own Less folder, change it, and then import that instead. So hopefully that helps with some of that overwriting Bootstrap that just gets really painful sometimes.
Incredible. I don't know, Latisha, you probably can't see, but we got a few thank yous and a few people really enthusiastic about Sass and Less. So
excellent. I'm going to get these files uploaded to the Git repo, and I'll get the grunt file corrected in all the other repos soon.
Perfect. Thank you, Latisha. Can you just Gitter everyone when you're done?